Good day. In this, I'm going to talk about how to sell yourself as a data-driven individual in job interviews. And I believe the first would be to give you an example from philosophy, from two famous philosophers, Aristotle and Plato. These two actually knew each other quite well in the sense that Aristotle used to be Plato's student. However, their way of reasoning and explaining things were quite different. Okay, for example, Plato used to have his famous allegory of the cave, into which he tried to explain how to illustrate. He tried to illustrate the distinction between the reality and appearance. Okay, and the way he would illustrate this distinction was to present an experiment of some prisoners who were put in a cave and who were forced to live all their lives in a cave in front of a fire with some shades on the wall. And this was actually their entire life revolved around those shades on the wall. Now, when a prisoner escaped, they quickly realized that what they were living inside that cave was a very limited and distorted reality. So when he came back to that cave to save the others, to convince them, hey, you're living in a very limited world, it was very hard for him to convince them. And the others, the others living in a cave rejected him. Okay, so this is, the point of this was the reticence of getting in more knowledge, and the preference of familiar perceptions. Okay, so this is where the expression "you live in a cave" comes from, right? Now, this is in contrast with Aristotle's way of thinking. Aristotle used to be his student, by the way, and Aristotle is famous for putting the basis of biological research and using empirical evidence to demonstrate things. His a very famous experiment was the development of the chicken embryo. So Aristotle systematically opened fertilized chicken eggs at different stages of incubation. He documented the sequential development of the organs within the embryo, which led him to propose the theory of the epigenesis. So at the time, this contradicted with the popular belief of preformationism, the idea that fully formed miniature organism was present from conception, right? So Aristotle was a highly data-driven individual based on observation. So you're looking for the same. Now, the second thing you should keep in mind when selling yourself as a data-driven candidate would be to always structure your answers in the STAR format, right? Remember Aristotle, way of empirical evidence is a structured process. So by presenting yourself with your STAR answers, you're already more likely to be perceived as a data-driven candidate, right? The other thing you could do in your answers would be to prepare answers for the most commonly asked questions around data, such as, how do you handle a situation where data contradicts your initial hypothesis or gut feeling? Okay, so where data contradicts your initial hypothesis. For example, where you build an algorithm which was supposed to be quickly, but it's not, or maybe you design a database query which maybe was not as quick as you would expect it, or on Excel formula taking longer than you had expected, right? This would be some very common examples. Another very common interview question for data would be, how do you explain a complex data analysis or insight to a non-technical audience? Okay, so how would you explain the cloud to a non-technical person? And the idea here would be to understand the context. If you for example, you could explain the cost cutting as a cost cutting measure, because using on-prem servers is far more expensive than using the cloud, right? Or maybe you could explain it in a scientist's environment where the cloud might provide you with more computing power, which again you could even stretch it in a cost-cutting measure, but the context would be super interesting. And the third question about data-driven decision-making would be, what tools do you use to analyze data, or for data analysis in general? And here, people who are really knowledgeable with these things are more inclined to use specialized tools such as R and even programming such as Python rather than using Excel, right? So this could also be revealing, right? The third thing you should keep in mind to sell yourself as a data-driven candidate would be to take a look at your CV and also your cover letter oftentimes. So basically in your CV, you should focus on replacing some of the more generic statements, such as I helped improve, with more quantifiable statements or results, such as I optimize the process to save 20,000 annually, So you must focus more on specific details, the most relevant metrics without overdoing it, right? Or in the cover letter, in your opening, you could also briefly state how you use data to drive success in your previous roles and show your availability to explain this more during the interview, if you so wish to sell yourself. But the point would be to start with your CV and your cover letter and start there, right? The fourth idea, if you want to sell yourself as a data-driven candidate, would be in your questions for them. Right? So at the end of the interview, do you have any questions for me? The types of questions you might ask them would be something on lines: what key metrics does the company use to track success in this role? Okay, or can you tell me about time when a data-driven insight led to a change in strategy? Again, in your specific area of expertise here. Or what's your process for using data to make important decisions, right? I could easily see someone applying for a senior manager or director or VP role using these types of questions, right? And the fifth thing I would recommend you to do to better sell yourself as a data-driven candidate in job interview would be to role play and to practice these things, these mock interviews. The main goal of this practice or practicing your story bank, so to speak, would be to become more articulate and confident, because actually being confident in the way you speak and being confident, building confidence in yourself for this job interview is also an important step in selling yourself as a data-driven candidate. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.